of invitation will be 488. 488. Now, Brother Bass.
It's a joy and pleasure to be here this evening. I've been looking forward to coming and being back. I left Calhoun County about 47 years ago. And we left in January, the first day of January of 1979. I moved back about 20 years ago to Shelby County and moved about a year and a half ago to the Wetumpka area. So I'm not far away, but coming through, it was interesting seeing some of the landmarks, places we used to go and visit in Oxford and Anniston, Jacksonville, see how things have grown. But it's a joy to be here. It's good to see young people here. Appreciate you, all of you, being here, and hope that we'll gain a lot from our study tonight. History has an interesting way of recording things. And I've wondered what historians will have to say about this past century. As we look back, especially those of us who are a few years old, we realize that this probably will be called an age of revolution. We can go back into the 1960s and we remember what was called the sexual revolution. We come forward from the 1980s up into the 2000s and we have the digital revolution. We find that if we were to go back further, we could say the cultural revolution. But the last few years, we've seen what surely will be recorded as a political revolution. And all of these things in and of themselves are not good or bad, but in some ways it reminds me of something that Charles Dickens wrote many years ago. Charles Dickens said, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. And it was the winter of despair." Now, the extremes that we see there in what Dickens wrote surely describe, at least to some degree, what we have seen and experienced in the past several years. Technology today continues to amaze me. You can give a cell phone to a 4 or 5-year-old and it's like they were born with it in their hand. I'm amazed. We have several children. One of them is in Oklahoma City. And there we have our youngest grandchild. B is 4 years old. And they will take and FaceTime us from Oklahoma to Alabama, and it's almost like being in the room with her. It's amazing how technology has come so far in the past few years. Why, I know some of you, you're older than I am, you remember the phone booth. Probably remember when it went from 10 cents to 25 cents. But when's the last time that you used a phone booth? I was trying to remember. I don't know when that was. It's been a while. Oh, how technology has changed. We live today in a time in which we are so blessed. It's been said that the poorest American is richer than a king lived 125 years ago, and there's no question. When I see the things that we have, when I see the blessings that God has provided, things that in years gone by were for only the upper class, it's more and more apparent. On the other hand, we live in a time when violence is threatening our nation. And we've seen in the last several years so many things. Satan has a bag full of tricks. The Bible describes many schemes that he has. You know, it's amazing, and I'm not opposed to cell phones. I have one, and I enjoy, for the most part, a lot of it. But you know, it's sad, the discord and problems that social media causes with so many. It seems that with some, it's who's who in America. Look what I have. Look what I'm doing. Look where I'm traveling. Look what I'm wearing. Look what I'm eating. Look what I'm doing. And in so doing, it creates a lot of problems. And we find that some people are so quick to respond to something and hit send before they hit think up here. It's caused a lot of folks to develop high blood pressure. Another part of that technology that we have today. Politically, we've seen in the last few years things that we never saw in my lifetime. It's tragic, the hatred that seems to exist among parties and among people. It's worse to be a Democrat and Republican in Washington than to be an Alabama and Auburn fan. You see such contempt for one another and so many serious problems. And we don't know what the headlines tomorrow may say, because the problems focus around many of our politicians who are concerned more about themselves than they are about this country. I say all of that to say this. It's time for you and I as Christians to stand up and be counted. The world is making a mess of things. Satan in the world has done that throughout time. But while we need to be standing up, we need to be counted, we need to be a presence, it seems that for the most part, this isn't the case. As a matter of fact, our influence, if anything, is waning as New Testament Christians, but even as the world describes Christianity, it seems to be dropping. In the last 2 decades, church membership has dropped from 70% in 1998 to an all-time low in 2018 of 50%. 50%? And if we single out the millennials, for those of us older, that's if you were born after 1979, church membership drops to 42%. Everything that I have seen regarding polling of millennials says that for the most part, this generation has little or no interest in the Bible, little or no interest in God, and certainly little or no interest in the church. Now, if you look at actual church attendance, the real tragedy is, of those polled, only 22% said they attend somewhere every Sunday. Now, I'm not talking about just the New Testament church. I'm talking about the religious world. 22 out of 100? Where are the others? Where are the other 78? You know, it's like the lepers that Jesus healed, and only one came back, and Jesus said, where are the 9? Where are the 78%? Well, some of them are on the golf course, and some of them are at the lake. Some of them are on the road traveling. Some are at the mall shopping. Some are sleeping in. Some are working. And on we could go. Our world is becoming more and more secular, more and more worldly. And as we think about that, we shouldn't be surprised that the church does not have the influence in its community that it once did. There are many reasons, and if I were to ask tonight and we were to go around the auditorium, you would probably have one or more reasons why we have lost some of our influence. But I want to suggest something from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 that I believe certainly contributes to our loss of influence, because maybe we are not taking it seriously as we begin a new year, 2023. We are not the salt of the earth, and we're not the light of the world that Jesus calls upon us to be. And the tragedy is, when we're not letting our light shine, when we're not being a positive influence as salt, guess what? The world ignores us. When our lives are little or no different than people that we go to school with, or people that we work with, or our family or our friends who are not Christians, the world chooses to ignore us. We're not an influence often for all. But if we will be the salt of the earth that Jesus calls upon us to be, if we will be the light of the world, then the world will listen. The world will pay close attention to what we say and what we do, how we live. But we have to be the salt. We have to be the light for the world to do that. Let's read the text in Matthew chapter 5. We're just going to read a few verses tonight, not the entire sermon. But I want you to hear what Jesus says, beginning with verse 13 of Matthew chapter 5. He said, "You are the salt of the earth." Now, as we begin, notice the simplicity of Jesus' teaching. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, we know how flavorful salt is. He said, it's good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot of men. Think about that. How is it good to season our food? How is it good for other purposes? It's not. And in our language, these words have become really somewhat of a proverb. If someone is genuine, if they're useful, if they're straightforward, what do we say about them? Why, man, there's Gary McCurdy. He's a salt of the earth person. What a comparison. We value salt. Our English word, salary, comes from a Latin word, salarium, and guess what it means? Salt money. Salary comes from the expression in Latin, salt money. Our expression, why, you know, old John over there, he's not worth the salt. Just the opposite. I think of several things that salt's good for. First of all, salt seasons our food. Now, if you look at me, you can tell I enjoy eating. I'm an old Southern boy, and I enjoy food. But you know I don't enjoy food without salt. I had a doctor a few years ago, Gary, he had the audacity to tell me I didn't need to be eating salt. He's not on my Christmas card list anymore. I love eggs. We had chickens in Shelby County. We had up to 60 chickens at a time. I love eggs. But have you ever eaten an egg with no salt on it? They're not very good. And I enjoy grits. I enjoy rice with my eggs. And I really like to salt grits and rice. I like everything with a little bit of salt. Why, even when my wife makes cookies and pies, guess what? Puts a pinch of salt in it. If I were to ask you about that, you'd probably not know it, especially young people. But salt's important. It seasons our food. It flavors our food. But second of all, salt preserves. I had a friend in West Tennessee, and he kills hogs every year. And he had a wonderful little meat house. Best smelling place I've ever been, because there were sides of bacon and there were hams hanging in there. And you know, it was amazing because this thing had been around a long time, and it was like a kitchen in that it had counters around. And on those counters, salt was still there. They didn't worry about cleaning it up. But they would take that meat and they would pack that salt on it, and amazingly, you could hang that up and it would last for a long period of time. You didn't have to freeze it. Didn't have to refrigerate it. We know that salt preserves our food. It retards spoilage. Now, it doesn't prevent decay, but it slows it down tremendously. And you know, when I left Alabama and I met my wife in West Tennessee, but I was introduced to a food there talking about salt I'd never had in Alabama, and that was country ham. Those folks know what to do with salt. Now, I love sugar-cured ham, but country ham really has its own place, and it's a wonderful product. But there's a third thing that we use salt for, and that is as an antiseptic. We don't think about it that much today, but in years gone by it was. But if you put salt on a wound, first of all, it stings. Oh boy, it stings. But then we find that it will kill some bacteria, some germs. So it's good for that. We could talk about the fact that salt gives strength. The Roman soldiers, they were paid with a ration of salt. And one of the things that they knew was that if the soldiers ate their food with salt, it would give them strength. Salt's very important to the human body, and we need it. And then we could talk about something that everybody really likes, and that is salt creates thirst. I bet there's not a soul here that doesn't like potato chips, popcorn, and pretzels. One or all. What happens, though, when we eat those salty foods? It makes us thirsty. We want something to drink. Water, other things are good for our body. So salt has a very important purpose of keeping us hydrated. Now, you know something that's interesting to me. Our Lord could have used any number of expressions to describe Christians. He chose salt. He didn't choose honey. Now, we had bees a few years ago, and, you know, honey's almost as good as salt. That's good stuff. But Jesus didn't say, go out into the world and be sweet. Go out into the world and be the honey of the world. No, He said, be the salt of the earth. Because salt is something that's greatly needed. And what are we to be doing as the salt of the earth? We need to be flavoring the world. You know, quite simply, the world stinks. Immorality, ungodliness, dishonesty, the unit of a family. And I could not believe a few years ago when Alabama, of all things, tried to give a new definition of marriage. Young people don't fall for it. God gave the definition of marriage and is found there in Genesis chapter 3. I never would have believed that a conservative southern state like Alabama would do that. And that is just a small part of what our nation is doing, how that they're traveling a very slippery slope going downhill in so many ways. We need to flavor this nation. As children of God, we need to stand for the right principles, godly principles. One of the most important characteristics that we read about God, not once but repeatedly, is that God is holy. Guess what? He calls upon us as His children to be holy. If we will live holy lives, if we will go out into the world and stand up and be counted as holy, if we will be the salt of the earth, we can flavor this world and make it better. So often we sit at home and we wring our hands and we think there's nothing I can do and I'm just one person. But if every Christian, every New Testament Christian will work together, we can make a difference. We can make a difference. But second of all, as salt, we need to be preserving this world. You know, Jesus didn't have any illusions about how bad the world was. He walked among the streets and the plains, and He saw wickedness at its very worst. He understood how that like a rotten piece of meat, and right now, driving here, I saw a lot of deer on the side of the road, bless their hearts. You leave them a few days, even in this weather, and they begin to do what? To stink. We need to be a preservation factor in the world because our world is rotting around us. Things that were considered immoral or ungodly 10 or 15 years ago are now, they're being accepted. Oh, that's okay. No, it's not okay. And young people learn just because the world says something is okay does not mean that God says it's okay. And we're going to be judged by Him. What does it take to stop the spread of the evil in our world? Salt. Pure and simple. A preacher several years ago was getting ready to preach on moral issues. He was in one of the larger places and they had their security team and all of this and he had announced his subjects and one of them was going to be homosexuality. And some of them on the security team said, you don't need to do that. Why, there are people who will become angry and it may be a threat for you. Just don't deal with that. And he said, no, he said, I've got to take a stand for what the Bible teaches. And that evening, one of the older gentlemen took him aside and he said, he said, I'm proud of you because you aren't afraid of the world. You're willing to teach what the Bible says and you believe what God says. And I would suggest that if we are the salt of the earth, that man was right. Whether it's in the pulpit or whether it's in the pew, we need to take a stand. And some things are not popular. As a matter of fact, if they were popular, would Stephen have been stoned? Would Jesus have been persecuted? What about Paul and the others throughout New Testament times? No. But the exciting part is it doesn't take a lot of salt to do the trick. As I said, just a little pinch of salt and cookies or cake makes a world of difference. I think about Abraham. What a man he was. And he had a nephew. You remember Lot? Lot made a really serious mistake in judgment, and I'm giving him a lot of benefit. I don't know the circumstances. But first of all, when he separated from Abraham, he was going in the direction of Sodom, and then lo and behold, we turn around and he's given up his tent. I don't know, Gary, what happened to his flocks and herds. But he's got a house. right in the middle of one of the most wicked cities to ever exist in the world, Sodom, neighboring Gomorrah. And God said, you know, I really feel like Abraham needs to know what's going on. I'm going to destroy these cities. So he tells Abraham, one of the most fascinating exchanges between God and any human being, in my opinion, in the Bible. I see Abraham, and you know, Abraham was considered a great man and a prince, and God had great confidence and love for him. But imagine Abraham standing before God, and he said, Lord, if there are 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, will you not destroy it? That'd take a lot of courage, wouldn't it? God said, Abraham, if there are 50 righteous, I won't destroy it. Abraham thought about it. Well, Lord, what if there are only 45? What if there are only 40? What if there are only 30? What if there are only 20? And with each question, God said, I won't destroy it if there are that many righteous souls there. And as I look at this and as I read it, I think how sheepish Abraham must have been. Well, Lord, what if there are only 10 righteous souls? Remember, he started with 50. What if there are only 10? God said, Abraham, if there are 10 righteous souls, I won't destroy the city of Sodom and the city of Gomorrah, the cities of the plain. I think about that and I realize that for 10 righteous souls, 10 grains of salt, God said, I won't destroy the cities. That's how much influence one person or 10 people can be. That's how much influence a congregation such as you have here can be in your area, in your neighborhood, in your school, in your work, in your family. Of course, God didn't destroy the city until he took the 3 righteous out. Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters. The influence of righteousness. And side note, despite what we may think of Lot, isn't it interesting that we read about Lot in the New Testament and he's called righteous? He was vexed daily by the sin of the wicked cities. I ran across something that fascinated me, and young people, I hope you'll take this to heart as you grow up and become an adult and start your families. A sociologist by the name of Robert Bellah made this statement. I'm not reading lengthy, it's one short sentence, but I want you to hear it. It's interesting to me. Robert Bellah, sociologist, said, and I quote, "The governing values of a whole country or culture may be changed when 2% of its people have a new vision." End of quote. Now, you understand what that means? If 2% of the population, if we have 100 people and 2% have a change in thinking, they can influence the other 98. What does that mean for us as Christians? We're the salt of the earth. While we go out into the world and immediately we're in the minority as Christians. But we can change people. Because Jesus said we're salt. We can change the world. We can flavor the world. We can make it better. 2% is all we need. And we're blessed here in Central Alabama. Because we've got that among New Testament Christians. It applies in every area of life. Now, here's the bottom line. It's time for the salt to get out of the shaker and get into the soup. Now, I want you to think about this, and let's make this real simple. A lot of us as salt, we're there in the shaker and it's over the pot and we're looking down at the soup, and what do we see? We see, oh, there's Brussels sprouts. Ooh. And tomatoes and there's all kinds of vegetables and meat floating in there. You know, I don't think I want to be in that soup. I'd rather stay here in the salt shaker. You know, in the salt shaker, everybody looks just like me and it's safe. Does that sound familiar? Is that the way that we live often day to day? In the comfort of our church building, in our Bible classes, we can talk about how Christians ought to do this or that, how Christians ought to live, and it's easy when we're here in the comfort of the shaker. It's another thing when we go out into the world, when we get out into the soup. Sometimes as the salt, we say, I want to stay in the shaker. But you know, as long as the salt's in the shaker, it's not doing its job. It's worthless. It's not until the grain of salt is put into the soup that something distinct happens. Two things, actually. One, the salt dissolves. And number two, it forever changes the flavor of the food. How wonderful that is. You may disappear into the world when you act as salt, but when you do that, you're going to make the world a better place. A handful of salty Christians can change everything if we believe the teaching of Jesus. But let's continue. Verse 14, 15, and 16. What is it Jesus went on to say? He said, you're the light of the world. First of all, he said we're salt. Now he says we're light. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. What is light? It's illumination. If we were to flip the switches, and I assume those are for the auditorium, it'd be pretty dark in here, wouldn't it? We realize what light does. Light penetrates darkness. It reveals the things that are around us. And it exposes everything for what it is. You know, most people, to some degree, don't like the dark. I'm not saying that everyone is scared of the dark, but most people don't like the dark because we don't like what we can't see. I remember as a kid, I enjoyed working at the church building in Piedmont, and that, you know, the old building there on Memorial Drive. It's been there a lot longer than I have. And I actually spent the night there several times. I would paint classrooms and restrooms. And one night I had the bright idea. I was going up on Friday night and spend the night so I could get started early Saturday morning. Now, I didn't live but a 10-minute bike ride, so, you know, probably more of that was adventure. But I can remember turning off the lights, and I was there in the nursery, old furniture in an old building, and all of a sudden I could hear sounds I'd never heard before. You know, when you're 13, 14, imagination begins to run wild. There wasn't a light on in there. It was dark. And you could hear sounds from other parts of the building. And needless to say, I didn't get up and go exploring that night. I'm not afraid of the dark, but I felt safer in there under the cover. See, the world is in darkness. It's amazing how many times the Bible talks about sin and darkness and uses that as a comparison. Now, Jesus said that we're to be a light. And we're to let our light shine, and others will see our good deeds, our good works. And you know, that word good actually can be defined as attractive, as beautiful, and as lovely. Others can see our good works. They can see our attractive works. They can see the things that we do to help others. Just because. Not that I'm going to get something out of it. You know, one expression that I don't like the world uses, well, you know, you did something for me, I owe you. My response to that is, no, you don't. I didn't help you so that you would do something for me. I want to help others because I'm a Christian. I want them to see my light shining. I want to glorify and reflect the Son, Jesus Christ. Now, if we live as a Christian and we let our light shine, we're going to draw others. We need to be more active talking to others about Jesus. I saw a Backwoods shirt over there, didn't I? Backwoods? Any of you that know John Rice, I hold John up around. John and I have been friends for a long time, and I don't know many Christians that I have higher esteem for than John. John is one that can go into a McDonald's he's never been in before, and it doesn't matter if the the person behind the counter is 16 or if they're 46, John will talk to them about salvation. Going to heaven? He's not ashamed. He'll bring it up. He'll talk to them. He loves them. He doesn't know their name, but he loves them. Isn't that marvelous? Isn't that what we're to do as Christians? We're not to be embarrassed. You know, a lot of us, we kind of hold our head and we want to apologize. Well, I'm a Christian. Like something's wrong with us. We need to hold our heads high. We need to be proud. Our Father, He owns this world. And look at all that He's done for us. Sometimes just taking the opportunity to talk with an older person. See how their day is. See if something can be done to make things better for them. Sometimes, and I hate to say it, but I'm as bad as everyone else. I don't like stamps and paper. Sometimes a text. A text. Thinking of you. Hope you're having a good day. Can I come over and do something for you? All of those are little things in which we let our light shine. Some of you, I bet, here can make pretty good cakes and cookies and pies. I remember that growing up. You know, it's amazing what you can do. A pie, and my mother loved to bake. She found that a pie would open a door faster than anything. And pretty well every week she would make at least one pie, or she loved to make pound cake, and she would take that to someone. Made me mad because I wanted that at home. I tell people, Gary, and I guess I shouldn't admit it, but I found out as a kid, if you slam the back door when that cake is cooking, it'll fall sometimes. And Mother would be embarrassed and she wouldn't take it. And I don't know if you've ever eaten a fallen pound cake, but they're far better than one that's not fallen. So I could have caused that to happen a few times. But, you know, just something simple like baking something and carrying it to someone. They don't have to be sick. They don't have to be a funeral. It can just be someone, a neighbor, a friend, someone. We let our light shine. I think about on the job or at school. Maybe you've had a bad day with the teacher at school, or maybe at work, a supervisor's been kind of rough, and you're getting ready to leave, and you see them standing out by their car with the hood up. What do you do? No. If we're going to let our light shine, what do? We go and help. We do more for Christianity by showing our good works when we let our light shine. But you know the amazing thing? Jesus said, let your light shine, not so that people will say, oh, look at David, what a good guy he is. No, let your light shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. We don't do it for ourselves. We don't do it so somebody's going to pay us. We don't do it so someone's going to say thank you. We do it to glorify our God. Edgar Guest wrote a few lines, and it's called The Living Sermon. And I love it. You've probably heard it many times. But he said, I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather one would walk with me than merely tell the way. The eye's a better pupil and more willing than the ear. Fine counsel is confusing, but example's always clear. The best of all the preachers are the men who live their creeds, for to see good put into action is what everybody needs. It's easy to talk a good game, but it's something else to live it. For the world to see me and say, there goes a Christian. I don't need to wear a cross around my neck, or we don't need earrings of crosses or t-shirts with crosses. People ought to see Jesus living in us. Through our good works, through our example, as we let our light shine. And God gets the glory. That's the marvelous point. God gets the glory. I can't imagine anything better than being the light of the world. I can't imagine any greater influence than you and I can have than letting our light shine. You know, back in the early 1970s, and some of you are going to say, ooh, Coca-Cola did a commercial. And they they took candles, and I forget how many people, they reenacted this 10 or 15 years ago. They got all of the people back, I think, that did the original commercial, got them back and redid it. Remember the song, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony, but each one of them had a candle. Now, if you light one small candle, it doesn't give off much light. But imagine 20 candles, 40 candles. How many were here this morning? 83? Imagine 83 candles in here. If we turned out the lights, the building would not be dark. Imagine we go into the schools and we go into work and we go other places and we are the candle, we are the light, and we're letting ourselves shine before men. God is going to be glorified and the world is going to see Jesus, His principles, His teaching. And these are the things that will make a difference not only here, but in eternity. And the marvelous thing about what we're talking about tonight is that, we're already salt. We're already light. We don't have to go back to school and get a doctor of light degree or a master's of salt degree. Jesus already said, you are the salt, you are the light. We've got everything that we need within our possession, within this book, to be the kind of people. We need to get out of the shaker and get into the soup. We need to turn our light on and not be burying our head in the sand, but we need to be a child of God. We need to be using our influence for good. Oh, what a difference we can make in this world. As we leave tonight, we need to commit to doing the very best that we can. Not playing at it, not half-hearted effort. But we need to give it everything that we have. And that means speaking up, and it means speaking out. It may cost a little bit time-wise. It may cost a little bit financially. But we've got to be the salt of the earth. We've got to be the light of the world if we're going to please God. And we've got to reveal to this world how bad sin is and how wonderful Christianity is. I made a statement this morning when I was preaching. A statement that I believe is so very true. And that is, our world does not understand the joy that comes from serving Christ. We confuse joy and happiness. I'll give you a good illustration. If you brought in some homemade ice cream, and if I come back, that's a hint. Peach is really good. And you give me a bowl of homemade ice cream, I'm going to be real happy. I'm going to smile, and I'm going to enjoy every bite. But what happens if I drop that bowl and it lands on the floor? I'm going to be very unhappy. I'm going to be very sad. See, happiness is just an emotion. The joy that we find as Christians is not an emotion. It's a part of our makeup, who we are. True Christian joy means that even though I spill my ice cream, I still have joy in my life because God is my Father and heaven is promised as my home. The world doesn't know joy. The world is sad. We live in a time when everybody is stressed about everything, and part of the reason is they don't know joy. But the second thing that the world doesn't know is peace. The Bible talks about the peace that passeth all understanding. What that means is, if I am a child of God and I'm in the right relationship with God, I can go home tonight and I can go to bed. And if my house burns and I die, that's okay. If my heart stops beating and I die tonight, that's okay, because something far greater is awaiting for me on the other side of death, and that's that heavenly home. Peace. I know a 16-year-old boy, and he's having some health issues. And he told his mom, he said, I've been afraid several times I'm going to die. Now, he's a Christian, but he knows he's not doing what he should as a Christian, and he's scared to death. He's scared. He is not grown, he is not matured to understand that peace that passeth all understanding, to know that there's more to living than just this world. My friends, the New Testament tells us about a wonderful place called heaven. And that's what life is all about. This is why we want to be the salt and the light, because we want to go there, but we want to be the salt and the light so that our friends and our family and our schoolmates and our co-workers go there with us. Let's not be selfish about it, but let's share the news. Tonight we extend the invitation of Christ. If you've not obeyed the gospel, we want you to do that. We want you to enjoy that peace. We want you to know that joy. The world hasn't found it. If, as a child of God, there's sin in your life, make it right, repent of it, confess it tonight, and let us pray with you. But most of all, make that commitment tonight. When you leave here, this sermon's not going to just be filed away in the back of your mind somewhere, but you're going to listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 5, 13 through 16, and you're going to be the salt of the world. You're going to be the light. And in so doing, you're going to glorify your Father. If you need to respond to the invitation, come now while we stand and while we sing this song.